She came to borrow sugar, and somehow stayed long enough to change everything. The day had started quietly, the kind of ordinary morning that feels almost invisible. The soft hum of the refrigerator, sunlight spilling in through half-closed blinds, and the faint scent of freshly brewed coffee lingering in the air. He was in the kitchen, absently stirring his cup, lost in the rhythm of routine. And then there was a knock at the door. When he opened it, she was standing there. A woman in her early 40s, graceful in a way that made every casual movement seem intentional, held a small, slightly apologetic smile. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, "but could I borrow a little sugar?" It was such a mundane request, yet something about the way she said it, the soft warmth in her voice, the subtle hesitation behind her eyes, made the moment feel intimate, almost fragile. He found himself stepping aside, motioning her in, as if welcoming her into more than just his kitchen. She lingered at the threshold, glancing around briefly before her eyes met his. There was a quiet confidence there, but also a trace of something softer, a vulnerability she didn't hide but didn't flaunt either. He noticed the gentle lines at the corners of her eyes, the way her hand briefly brushed his as she took the sugar container from him. That accidental touch lingered, charged with unspoken curiosity and warmth. She offered a small laugh, one that seemed to fill the space, light and genuine. "I didn't expect to be invited in," she said, as if both apologizing and thanking him at once. There was a rhythm to her voice that felt easy, familiar, the kind that made a stranger's presence feel like a long-awaited pause in the day. As she stepped into the kitchen, the sunlight caught the soft waves of her hair, and he found himself noticing details he hadn't intended to. How she moved, how her gestures had a kind of quiet grace, and how even the simplest things, like holding a cup or leaning slightly against the counter, seemed charged with subtle, unspoken emotion. He offered her a chair without thinking, and she hesitated only briefly before settling in, placing the sugar jar gently on the counter. There was a small silence, one that didn't feel awkward but rather loaded with possibility. He realized he was suddenly acutely aware of her presence, the faint perfume that lingered, the warmth radiating from her as she shifted slightly closer, and the soft cadence of her breathing in the quiet room. In that simple, ordinary moment, something unspoken began to form. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was curiosity, intrigue, and the faint flutter of anticipation. He wondered about her life, what brought her here beyond the sugar, and whether she felt the same small spark he did in that shared, sunlit kitchen. That single visit, so ordinary in appearance, carried the subtle weight of connection, the first brush of something that could change the rhythm of his quiet life in ways neither of them yet realized. By the time she stood to leave, just minutes after arriving, or perhaps longer, time seemed irrelevant. He found himself hoping she wouldn't go, and she, for her part, hesitated just enough to make that hope feel mutual. The sugar jar sat on the counter between them, but it felt like an excuse, a pretext for something far more lingering. He offered her a mug, and she accepted, her fingers brushing his in that fleeting, electric way that made him suddenly aware of the warmth of his own skin. He could see the sunlight catching the amber tones in her hair as she moved to pour coffee, the gentle tilt of her head as she smiled, amused by some small detail in the room. "You have a nice kitchen," she said, leaning casually against the counter. Her voice had a softness to it, almost intimate, as though she were speaking to a space rather than a person, but he felt every word land on him. He smiled, unsure whether to laugh or simply let the moment linger. She sat across from him at the small table, and for a moment, silence hung in the air. Not awkward, but suspended, like a breath held between two people on the edge of discovering something. He watched her stir her coffee, the delicate movement of her fingers curling around the handle of the mug. The room smelled of roasted beans and faint vanilla from the candle on the counter, a warm, grounding scent that made it easy to forget the outside world. Their conversation started small, trivial observations about the weather, the hum of traffic, the curious behavior of neighborhood cats. But gradually, it shifted. She spoke of her day, casually, yet he caught glimpses of deeper layers, the loneliness behind her laugh, the quiet strength she carried without needing to announce it. He told her about his own routines, his own little quirks, and found that she listened, not just hearing, but seeing him. There was a moment when her hand reached for the sugar again, lightly brushing his as he handed it to her. The contact was brief, almost imperceptible, but enough to send a ripple of warmth through him. She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made him wonder what she might be thinking, what memories or secrets lay behind it. The conversation meandered like a gentle river, flowing naturally from light-hearted anecdotes to quiet admissions. She shared a memory of a summer long ago, the kind of story that revealed both joy and regret, and he felt a surprising connection, as though she were inviting him into a space few people saw. He responded with honesty, admitting small vulnerabilities he usually kept tucked away. By the time the second cup of coffee was finished, the hours had begun to slip by unnoticed. The golden afternoon light shifted, casting long shadows across the table. He realized he hadn't once checked his phone or thought about the world outside her presence. There was only this, two people, a small kitchen, and a conversation that somehow felt larger than either of them. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but he felt the pull, an unspoken curiosity, a quiet desire to linger, to know more. And when she finally set her mug down, it was with a faint sigh, as if even she sensed the unusual ease between them. He wondered if she noticed it too. The way the room seemed warmer when she was there, the way the ordinary act of conversation had begun to feel extraordinary. In that shared space, over steaming coffee and whispered stories, the seed of connection had taken root. Neither of them said it aloud, but the energy was palpable, a quiet promise that something had begun, fragile and tender, that could grow into something neither expected. By now, the hours had drifted past like a quiet current neither of them noticed. Their conversation, once flowing effortlessly, began to ebb into pauses, comfortable silences that lingered longer than necessary. He found himself acutely aware of her presence, the soft weight of her hand on the edge of the table, the way her fingers traced invisible patterns on the mug, the faint warmth radiating from her whenever she shifted slightly closer. There was something magnetic about her, an effortless grace combined with an understated confidence that made the ordinary seem extraordinary. Yet, beneath that confidence, he sensed moments of hesitation, tiny cracks that revealed vulnerability. When she laughed at a shared joke, it was brief, almost tentative, as if she were careful not to overstay or overstep some invisible line. He caught himself leaning slightly forward, drawn to her, and immediately felt a flicker of self-consciousness. Was he reading too much into these gestures? Did she feel the same subtle pull he did, or was it all imagined? The awareness of their age difference, his youthful eagerness and her quiet, worldly composure, added a layer of tension he couldn't quite name. A small mishap broke the stillness. She reached for the sugar, and their hands brushed again. This time, it lingered for an extra heartbeat, and he noticed the way she paused, almost imperceptibly, as if weighing her comfort against some inner curiosity. He smiled, but gently, aware that any sudden move could shatter the delicate balance they had established. Their conversation picked up again, but the topics grew more personal, yet carefully, cautiously personal. She shared a fleeting story of a regret, a decision she sometimes revisited in her mind, and he responded with quiet honesty about his own moments of uncertainty. Each admission was small, intimate, and loaded with trust, though neither of them spoke of desire directly. He noticed the subtleties, the way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, the faint tilt of her head whenever she studied him, the soft exhale when their eyes met for longer than usual. Each movement carried weight. Each pause was a conversation in itself. The room was filled with unspoken words, the kind that make hearts race without a single sentence being uttered. As the afternoon light shifted toward evening, he realized they had created a shared space, one that existed outside time. There was warmth in their proximity, a magnetic pull neither wanted to name but both felt. Yet, the hesitation remained, a mutual awareness of boundaries, the quiet question of whether lingering too long would disrupt the fragile intimacy forming between them. He felt a mixture of admiration, curiosity, and restraint, emotions layered like the fading light across the kitchen counter. She noticed it too, he suspected, in the subtle way she leaned back or smiled softly, aware but unhurried. It was a dance neither knew the steps to, yet somehow they moved together effortlessly, a delicate balance of closeness and respect. By the time she finally stood to stretch, the air between them was charged with something gentle and electric, a promise of connection yet to be explored, balanced delicately on the edge of hesitation. Neither needed to speak it aloud. Both knew that this moment, simple and unassuming as it seemed, was quietly significant, the first true awareness of what might be, if time, patience, and courage allowed it. The kitchen had become a quiet world of its own, a space suspended somewhere between routine and something almost tenderly significant. The sunlight had softened into a warm, golden hue, filtering through the blinds and painting stripes across the countertop. In that light, even the smallest movements seemed to carry weight. She was reaching for the coffee pot when her hand slipped slightly, the cup tilting just enough for him to react. His reflexes were instinctive. A hand reached out, steadying hers before the liquid could spill. Their eyes met in that brief, intimate moment, hers wide with a mixture of surprise and gratitude, his caught in a flash of something warmer, something unspoken. The contact lingered, fingers brushing against one another with a softness that made the air feel thicker, charged. She smiled, a faint, slightly embarrassed curve of her lips, and for a moment, the world outside that kitchen ceased to exist. The accident became a pretext for shared laughter, light and genuine, but beneath it lay something quieter, an unspoken acknowledgement of closeness. He noticed the subtle tension in her shoulders easing, the way her posture softened as she leaned just slightly toward him. There was trust in her gaze now, a flicker of vulnerability that invited him in. As she settled back into her chair, their conversation deepened. She spoke of choices she had made, the kind of confessions usually reserved for someone long trusted. He listened, noticing not just her words but the inflections, the pauses, the small shifts of her fingers on the table. When he responded, he did so with equal honesty, revealing small cracks in his own confidence, moments of doubt and hesitation he rarely shared. The room was quiet save for the soft clink of spoons and the occasional sigh. He became acutely aware of the small, human details, the warmth radiating from her as she reached for the mug, the way her gaze lingered on him in moments when she thought he wasn't looking, the subtle fragrance of her perfume that made the space feel more intimate without a word being spoken. Their hands brushed again, this time not by accident, but in a moment of shared gesture, passing the sugar or reaching for the napkin. It was brief, almost fleeting, yet heavy with meaning. Neither pulled away immediately. Instead, they let the contact exist for a heartbeat longer, savoring the quiet warmth it brought. Time had begun to stretch. The ordinary had become extraordinary, not because of grand gestures or dramatic words, but through small acts of care, attentiveness, and shared presence. The subtle tension in the room, the delicate balance between longing and restraint, made each interaction feel electric. By the end of the afternoon, they had crossed an invisible threshold. They were no longer just two people sharing coffee. They had created a space of emotional intimacy, a quiet understanding that each could reveal something of themselves without judgment. The connection was tender, respectful, and laden with possibility, a slow-burn warmth that hinted at something deeper, even if neither dared name it yet. In that soft, golden light, the kitchen was more than a room. It was a witness to the unfolding of a quiet bond, fragile, sincere, and undeniably present. For the first time, he realized that she wasn't just a visitor borrowing sugar. She was someone who had entered his life in a way that might linger far beyond this afternoon. The afternoon had softened into early evening, the sunlight now a gentle amber that spilled across the kitchen floor, painting long, lazy stripes over the countertops. Time had begun to stretch and bend around them, unnoticed. They had talked, laughed, and shared stories, yet neither had mentioned leaving. It was as if the house itself held them there, cocooned in warmth and quiet anticipation. He noticed the way she shifted in her chair, the subtle brush of her sleeve against his arm, and the faint warmth radiating from her as she leaned slightly closer. Each accidental touch lingered just a fraction longer than necessary, enough to make him aware of the pull between them. She caught his gaze and held it a beat too long, a flicker of curiosity or perhaps something unspoken shimmering in her eyes. Their conversation had slowed into comfortable silences, the kind that don't feel empty but full of possibilities. He could hear the soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic outside, and the gentle clink of her spoon against the ceramic mug. Every little sound seemed amplified, drawing attention to the shared space between them. She laughed softly at something he said, and the sound was low, warm, and intimate. He found himself leaning back slightly, savoring the moment, noticing details he hadn't before. The curve of her smile, the way her hair caught the light, the subtle grace in the way she moved. He realized that these small, seemingly ordinary things were starting to feel extraordinary, layered with unspoken meaning. Their hands brushed again, this time over the small sugar jar as he passed it to her. Neither pulled away immediately. The brush of skin sent a warmth through him, a reminder that there was something more delicate, more compelling at work in these lingering moments. He was aware of the electric tension, subtle and quiet, threading through the room between them. For a fleeting moment, he imagined what it would be like to close that small gap between them, not in a rush, not forcefully, but gently, naturally. The thought made him hesitate. Was it the right time? Did she feel the same pull he did? The questions hung unspoken in the air, part of the slow dance of their unacknowledged attraction. She leaned back slightly, a faint smile playing on her lips, and for the first time, he felt the delicate balance of their connection fully, the blend of admiration, curiosity, and a soft yearning that neither dared name. The tension was not urgent or desperate. It was patient, simmering quietly, like the last warm rays of the sun clinging to the evening sky. By the time the shadows grew long and the light softened further, there was a sense of mutual awareness between them, a recognition that this shared time, these small touches, and lingering glances were more than coincidence. It was the quiet confirmation that something meaningful was taking root, fragile and tender, and that they both felt it. In the silence that followed, their proximity spoke louder than words. Hands brushed, glances held, and smiles lingered in ways that hinted at the deeper connection forming. There was warmth, there was longing, and above all, there was a slow-burn intimacy, suspended between hesitation and desire, a delicate thread weaving them together, moment by moment, hour by hour. The golden light had faded to a soft, dusky glow, the room now bathed in the subtle warmth of early evening. Shadows stretched across the kitchen, mingling with the gentle hum of the outside world. The hours had passed almost unnoticed, and with time came a shift, a quiet awareness that what they shared was no longer just casual conversation or accidental touches. She moved to gather her things, a slight hesitation in her movement that made his chest tighten. The air seemed heavier, charged with the things neither of them had yet dared to say. He watched her fingers linger on the edge of the table for a heartbeat longer than necessary, and he felt the same pull, a desire to reach out, to prolong the moment without words. As she collected her cup, her gaze flicked to his, soft and searching. I don't usually stay this long," she murmured, almost apologetically. But there was a hint of something beneath the words, an acknowledgement, perhaps, that this time had mattered more than either expected. He smiled gently, leaning slightly closer, his voice low and careful. "Neither do I, but I'm glad you did." It was a quiet confession, almost fragile in its delivery, yet it carried a weight that resonated between them. The unspoken tension, the subtle longing that had been threading through the afternoon, found a delicate voice. She exhaled softly, a half-smile forming, and for a moment, they simply looked at each other, the space between them alive with possibility. Their hands brushed again as she reached for the sugar jar, and this time, neither pulled away immediately. The contact lingered, gentle and grounding, a silent communication of curiosity, desire, and trust. He noticed how her fingers trembled slightly, the faint warmth radiating from her hand, and he felt an echo of that same nervous anticipation within himself. Words began to tumble out, hesitant but sincere. She admitted small things about herself, fears, hopes, moments of loneliness that she rarely shared. He responded in kind, offering fragments of his own life with the same careful honesty. Each revelation, no matter how minor, drew them closer, not physically yet entirely emotionally. There was a rhythm to it, a give and take of vulnerability that made the air between them feel charged with intimacy. Time seemed to hold its breath as they lingered in the space they had created. He noticed the way her shoulders softened when she realized she could speak freely, the faint smile that tugged at the corner of her lips, and the lingering way her gaze met his, as if seeking reassurance, connection, or perhaps something more. Finally, she straightened, preparing to leave, but neither moved quickly. They were suspended in a delicate moment, a heartbeat stretched between anticipation and hesitation. Her hand brushed his wrist as she gathered her bag, and he felt it, keenly, as if the simple gesture had conveyed everything words could not. In that quiet, fading light, the air was thick with understanding. They both knew that something had shifted, that this fleeting afternoon had left an indelible mark. It wasn't just coffee or borrowed sugar. It was a shared vulnerability, a recognition of mutual attraction and trust, wrapped in moments of intimacy that neither would forget. As she opened the door to leave, there was no rush, no dramatic gesture, just a lingering presence, a subtle warmth, and the quiet confession that had passed between them, that this encounter had mattered deeply and would continue to echo in both their lives long after the sun had set. The evening had fully settled in, painting the room in gentle shades of twilight. The kitchen, once bustling with the quiet rhythm of conversation and shared laughter, now felt suspended in a soft, almost reverent hush. The golden light of earlier hours had dimmed, replaced by the calm, diffused glow of the overhead light, casting everything in a warm, intimate hue. She stood by the door, her hand resting lightly on the frame, and he realized that the time had come. They had shared hours together, coffee, laughter, confessions, and the subtle, lingering touches that had made the afternoon feel like a suspended moment in time. There was no need for grand gestures or dramatic declarations. The weight of their connection was palpable in the small details, the quiet gestures that spoke volumes. He rose instinctively, his gaze meeting hers. There was a softness there, an acknowledgement of the unspoken bond they had built. For a moment, neither spoke, letting the silence carry what words could not. He noticed the faint tremor in her hand as she adjusted her bag, the delicate way her fingers brushed against his wrist, and the faint, lingering warmth of her presence that seemed impossible to leave behind. Finally, she smiled, small and gentle, the kind of smile that held gratitude, affection, and perhaps a hint of longing. "Thank you for everything," she said softly. It was simple, understated, yet it encapsulated the weight of the hours they had spent together. He returned the smile, feeling a warmth spread through his chest, a quiet acknowledgement that this afternoon had mattered in ways neither of them could fully articulate. He stepped closer, offering a subtle gesture of farewell, a hug that was brief but infused with meaning. The weight of her presence pressed softly against him, not in urgency, but in quiet intimacy. Their arms lingered for a heartbeat longer than expected, a small rebellion against the inevitable parting. Her cheek brushed his shoulder, and he felt the faint pulse of connection, a reminder that even a momentary touch could leave a lasting impression. When they finally pulled back, the air between them was charged, not with urgency, but with the gentle, lingering warmth of mutual understanding. She lingered for a second longer, as if hesitant to fully step back into the world outside, and he realized that this was the kind of connection that did not require words to define itself. As she finally left, closing the door softly behind her, he stood there for a moment, the faint scent of her perfume still lingering in the air, the memory of her smile and the warmth of her touch imprinted in his mind. There was a quiet fulfillment in that moment, a recognition that some encounters, brief and seemingly ordinary, could leave indelible marks on the heart. He returned to the kitchen, to the mug still resting on the table, and felt a gentle ache of longing, tempered by the serene satisfaction of shared connection. The day had begun with sugar borrowed and ended with something far sweeter, a bond built on trust, laughter, and the quiet intimacy of time spent together. In that simple, ordinary kitchen, an extraordinary moment had unfolded, leaving both of them changed, their hearts lighter, and their minds carrying the soft echo of what had been, a slow-burn connection, tender, lasting, and beautifully resolved. If this story warmed your heart and left you smiling, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more slow-burn romances that linger long after the screen fades. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced a fleeting moment that changed everything? We'd love to hear your stories.